and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I am your host, Sandy Lowres, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond who are talking about all the things other people think are taboo. You can join us at WB40.com. Before I begin today's podcast, I would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and pay homage to their ancient culture of storytelling. Today in the podcast, if you love true crime, you are really going to love our next guest. She is an Australian crime writer. She has an extraordinary debut novel. Her name is Nikki Mottram, and her novel is Crow's Nest. This is a riveting read from front cover to back cover. She writes about an extraordinarily strong woman in the child protection kind of area. Really fascinating because in real life, Nikki Mottram has a background in psychology and works in the field of child protection herself. Nikki lives in Toowoomba in Queensland, and this book, of course, is set in Toowoomba and a town called Crow's Nest. This is so riveting that Nikki has a second to this book coming out soon. This one has just been released, and her second book, Kalani, is due to be released next year. Please welcome to the podcast the delightful Nikki Mottram.
Hey there! When Sandy's not interviewing kick-ass women, she's hanging out with me at Alex the Seal, a podcast about music and nostalgia. I'm Jo Pybus, and each episode, Sandy and I talk about all the songs that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up. Do yourself a favour and search Alex the Seal on your podcast app. Love you, Molly.
Nikki, and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, Sandy. I'm really good. How are you?
I am very good. So you're up in sunny Queensland.
I am.
And I would like to say I'm down here in sunny Melbourne, but it is absolutely freezing today.
Really? Is it really?
It's freezing.
Wow. What temperature is it?
Well, it says it's 17, but it feels like 12. And but last week was 38 degrees. So what can we say? Melbs, hey?
Yeah. All the seasons.
Well, thank you for joining me. I want to say, first of all, congratulations. I'm holding it up for those that can see it. On your beautiful book. This is incredible. It's called Crow's Nest, Small Town, Big Secrets. It's riveting from the word go. So anybody who likes a bit of a mystery or true crime will really love this book. Congratulations on writing. It's phenomenal.
Thanks, Sandy.
And I love it.
Lovely to hear.
I couldn't actually put it down. And so, yeah, it was really good. So love it. I don't want to give too much away about this book because we really want people to rush out and buy it because it's pretty amazing. But I wanted to talk to you about, first of all, how it is that you came to write the novel, because you've got a really fascinating background.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'll let you jump in. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. Well, I'd always wanted to write a novel, but with this one, I think really the seed of it came around when I was sitting on the train reading a coronial inquest to a 30-year-old murder, basically, and I'd been at work all day and, I'd been reading and reviewing cases all day, and I was still kind of reading this report by 7:30, and my partner at the time said, what are you doing? And I just kind of said, I'm just so engrossed in this case and I just can't put it down. And at that point, I just finished writing a manuscript, but it was my first attempt, so it wasn't particularly good. And I was a bit sort of, where do I go from here? And he sort of said, well, maybe you should think about writing crime for your next novel. And, that was just such a good idea. And I went, you know what, that's a great idea.
God, I love that. And it's kind of fascinating because you work in an area of child protection. I will say that, and I'll give them a shout out. I have the pleasure of working with some really amazing women over at the Women's Legal Service of Victoria, where they deal in, of course, family violence and child protection as well.
Yeah.
It is an extraordinary area to be working in, but sometimes a really traumatic area, right?
Yes.
To be working in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, straight from uni, I guess I started in child protection. And so I did frontline work for about 10 years. And then kind of when I was about 30, I got into more of an administrative side of it. So since then, I've done largely case review, which is a bit of a step back from the frontline work, but, it still has its moments of difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of vicarious trauma, I think, in these sort of areas, and even regardless of the role that you play.
Yes.
I know myself, even of hearing about cases or reading cases that,
yes,
and then you realize, oh, this is real and this is going on in the world.
Yeah.
Yes. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that's why I think, good supervision is so important when you work in these kind of roles. And I've always been really lucky. I'm in an incredibly supportive and tight-knit team at the moment. And so, it's just been, I've been very lucky. So if you're going through something difficult or you're finding something difficult, there's always people to talk to about it.
Yeah, which is so great. It's so great to hear. And I do think that's important as well.
Yes, yeah.
I love that you kind of wove your working career, your life.
Yes.
Through this book. It's
Yeah.
quite fascinating to me. I wanted to say, for those that are yet to read the book, which has just recently come out, because, rush out and get it, believe me. But what I really found fascinating from a writing perspective is that you live in the town that you have based the book in, which of course is
Crow's Nest. Well, so I live in Toowoomba, which is where Dana is kind of has her base, and she goes out and works in Crow's Nest. So yes, I live in Toowoomba.
So I wanted to know what the reaction has been from Toowoomba, from the people living there, and to see a novel that's based, literally based in the town where they all live.
Yes.
Because some of this stuff is very gritty in this novel as well, and some of the characters are quite interesting.
Yes. Yeah, I think so far people have just been really excited, really. They've really enjoyed kind of reading a book which mentions places that they go to frequently and settings they're really familiar with. So, people have just been really excited so far. And, I had a baby and a toddler when I started writing this book. So it was just really important to me not to have to do too much research, to be honest. So, I set it in a place I was incredibly familiar with, just to make it easier on myself.
I think that's so clever, but also kind of fascinating as well. Do you think that the people, around you, like people living in Toowoomba, do you think when they read this novel, some of them will be like, I wonder if she was talking about me?
Yeah. It's very possible. But, as we all know, I guess crime and, that can happen anywhere, and child protection services, operate across the country in any demographic. So, this is a story that could have happened anywhere. I love the fact that Crow's Nest had such an atmospheric and kind of evocative name. So I always thought that'd be a fabulous name for a crime novel.
It is a fabulous name, but also too, I felt like I was there when I was reading. So you're very descriptive, which is really fantastic. And, you really, really do take the reader into these towns. I felt like I was really there. And I had no idea until I read this novel that Toowoomba is basically like full of gardens, and reading that in your book about all these sort of gardens and the descriptions of those gardens led me to then go, I'm going to go Google Toowoomba. And I went, look at that. Fascinating.
Yeah, we have some beautiful parks here. We're known as the kind of flower town, and we have the Carnival of Flowers every year, which brings a huge amount of tourism into the town.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by the whole, true crime genre. I'm a huge fan of true crime, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I love reading a good crime book, novel. But I'm just fascinated to hear your opinion on this. Why do you think it seems to attract more women, this genre, than it does men? It's a fascinating topic.
I know. I have thought about that a lot, and I've often thought about why I'm so attracted to it, really. Honestly, I think on some subconscious level, maybe women are trying to prevent it happening to themselves a little bit. I honestly kind of think you always bring it back to yourself a little bit, and just and I guess you're trying to learn things about people that you can pass on to your friends and your family and children about the world and perhaps what kind of people not to hang around with. And I think it teaches us a lot of lessons.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating that and in some ways a little bit sad and bleak that as women, I do think we're trying to arm ourselves with as much knowledge as we can.
Definitely.
To keep ourselves safe. And it's funny because my partner said, what is it about women and true crime? And I said exactly that to him. I feel like we are trying to just know what we're up against, who's out there. And maybe through listening to some of these podcasts, we might find ourselves in a situation where you go, oh, I know
red
what's
flags.
Happen.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It is fascinating. I mean,
it is.
And it seems to have cropped up. I mean, of course, there's always been crime novels. There's always been crime we've seen on television, docos, etc. But it seems to be this extraordinary genre, like perhaps since the rise of podcasts, that it's just everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, with the Lynette Dawson case, people across the country were just, riveted by it and following and just really hoping and praying to get some justice for her. So that was just so exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that don't know what we're talking about, it's an extraordinary podcast called The Teacher's Pet. And because of that podcast, obviously, they reopened a cold case and they actually have arrested Lynette's husband for her murder. And it's just such a fascinating podcast to listen to. But it's a really interesting one as well because the podcast was out there, it could have actually gone the other way, in terms of the court case where they were saying, how do we get people who are unbiased, because this is such an extraordinary podcast in terms of listenership. Like it had such an extraordinary listenership. Yes. And went global, right?
Yeah.
People around the world were listening to it.
Yep.
Incredible.
Yes.
The other one, I've actually had Sally Layden on this podcast, who, of course, her mother is the subject of The Lady Vanishes, which is the Channel 7 podcast of Marion Barter, which has had, I think, over 8 million downloads or something.
I haven't caught up with that one yet.
Yeah.
So
it's called The Lady Vanishes.
Right.
Because of the podcast, again, they've had to actually, they finally opened this cold case, and it is now the subject of an inquiry, which they're yet to pass down the findings of that inquiry, but quite phenomenal.
Yes.
So it's the power of that, I think.
Yes, definitely. That's right. With so many people getting behind it and, can really kind of possibly enact justice after so long. I think people get excited by that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. You've kind of professed, I'm going to read it. I've got questions here that I really want to ask you because I think they're quite important. Yeah. But you've got a real interest in miscarriages of justice. And that clearly comes through in this book, where you talk about, I guess, flawed human beings in police services, flawed investigations that go on. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it was a bit more of an issue in the 90s. And I feel like the policing service has, and, all the services around the police have kind of learnt from that a little bit now. And, if something like that happens these days, they send out a task force and they kind of get straight onto it because they know how expensive and horrible and tragic it is for everyone to have to do 3 inquests and just how awful that is. So I do feel like it's a bit of, something that was more relevant in the 90s, which is one of the reasons why I set Crow's Nest in 96.
I loved that as well, by the way. I think it's quite fascinating stepping in and going, 1996, because it takes us away from really where we are now. Like, I love that. So this, you know, this amazing woman, she's a very strong kind of character, which is Dana. And I really loved her name as well, by the way. Where did you get that from?
So Dana is, this is going to make me sound a little bit basic, but I'll be honest. I really loved the X-Files as a teenager. And I really loved Dana Scully. So, yeah, that's, I guess, what I was thinking about when I gave her that name.
Yeah, I kind of picked up on that because I was like, because I'm a mad X-Files fan, or I was back in the day.
Yes,
And actually my daughter, who's 25, has discovered the X-Files
wonderful.
now, and she's gone back and she's watching them.
That's great.
And I'm pretty sure that it is Scully that she...
Yes, yeah, she's just fabulous.
She is fabulous. It was really interesting reading that and her relationship, for want of a better word, with the police force as she's trying to, because there's two sort of cases that start to happen around here. One, I don't want to give away too much, but the book kind of centers on the murder of two women. And it's fascinating watching her frustration, I guess, with how the police deal with those murders.
Yes. Yeah, I guess, sometimes there can be a bit of friction between workers from different government agencies because, they're doing things differently, and sometimes you get different personalities drawn to the different roles. So often, you're working with police officers, and sometimes I guess the personality of social workers and police officers can be quite different, really. But, ultimately they're both there to protect children. So they are working towards the same common goal. It's just, that relationship can be quite interesting, and definitely interesting in the story.
Yeah, and her, because she's obviously working in child protective services, that's her thing.
Yes.
She is extraordinarily passionate about it. But she does actually, it's quite interesting that you show how easy it is, though, to become so ingrained in a case you cannot let go.
Yeah, she does get really obsessed, I guess, and because she's got so much going on in her personal life with the loss of her son and her marriage, which is kind of on the rocks, I think she finds it just a really good distraction to just kind of throw ourselves into the lives of others instead of kind of having to do that hard work in her own life, which I thought was incredibly interesting.
I did too. I think, the other part of this is that there is a child who does, I don't know, I don't want to give too much. We won't say what happens, but a child does go missing. And, but it was fascinating to me watching her, almost like her two parallel lives, if you like.
Yeah.
You mentioned the loss of her child, and then this child goes missing. And so there's this, you can actually see her trauma and her grief starting to play out in that way, which was so beautifully handled, I think.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah. Yeah, I think, it definitely, I feel like it would be, I think if you're going through anything personal of your own, it's a difficult job to do, child protection, and that's kind of what Dana's grappling with. She's had a huge loss herself, and initially she's sort of wondering if it's actually going to be possible for her to keep doing this kind of work. So then when Angus goes missing, that just, presses all her buttons.
And that's such a lovely relationship as well. Her meeting this kid and them actually building this really lovely friendship. And then her constantly almost questioning herself, like going, outside of the think this is so weird. But it is beautifully handled and beautifully written. And I think Angus is they're all very three-dimensional characters, you feel like they're very real, and so I think there's something really quite lovely about that relationship, I think.
I think when I was writing Angus, I kind of gave him the physical characteristics of my son, who was very young at the time and had this white blonde hair. So I did kind of really feel Dana's maternalistic instincts towards him. And initially I kind of wanted him to be a little bit like the Lucy character in the Patricia Cornwell novels. He was very good with tech. And I was going to, I guess, make him really serious and, maybe a tiny bit on the spectrum. initially, but then when I wrote him, he kept cracking all these jokes. So I quickly realized that wasn't going to work. So, you know, it just kind of took off itself, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that humour does come through. I think that's really quite sweet. But it's also really such a powerful tool, if you like, because she's so angsty at times and going through so much.
Yes.
And then there's this kid who's so lighthearted and does joke and is very mischievous in some ways.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I did. I mean, I did use a lot of humour, and at times I was thinking, God, is this going to be a problem? I feel like I'm writing this crime novel and everyone's cracking jokes in it. And particularly Lachlan. But I think, you know, in a lot of ways, I think it really is a bit of a coping mechanism working in these areas. And I think it's a relatively healthy coping mechanism, you know, in terms of what else you could be doing. So, yes, the humour did come through quite a lot.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the humour, if I'm honest. I think it kind of, because there is, you know, you sort of get really into this heavy
that's right.
kind of subject matter. And then there's this light-hearted moment that, you know, just works really well.
Yeah.
And especially when it's coming from Angus, I think, because as a child, it's kind of, you're able then to view things from his perspective.
Yes.
It's kind of this really sweet, childlike innocence in a world that clearly is filled with, you know, horrible things happening every day.
Yeah.
Right?
And I've really loved kind of the crime books that kind of show the beauty of the world juxtaposed against that darkness, because, I mean, there are, like Lachlan says, there are so many beautiful things in this world, and I just want that to come through. Like, I do struggle with, I guess, crime novels that are just uniformly bleak, and I you know, I get quite depressed by those. So it was really important to me to have that humour and that lightness and the beauty in the book as well.
And I think there's obviously a lot of, it's very Australian, which I really loved as well. And when I say that's because, you know, Australian novels don't always maintain that Australianisms, if you like, but you have. And I love that you've talked about things. So I'm reading this book going, everything's so familiar. As, you know, like she goes into the servo and she buys like Smith's potato chips, for example, or whatever, right? And it's those kind of brands and those images that we, you know, I guess were surrounded by in the 90s.
Yes.
It's very real.
Yeah.
Which I really loved. But the language that you use is so gorgeous. Like, it is very Aussie, you know.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. I don't know. I grew up in Toowoomba, so I guess I just tried to really write what I knew, essentially.
But I imagine too, like, that's the thing. Like, I mean, I've never been to Crow's Nest, but I imagine that if I went to Crow's Nest, like a lot of small towns in Australia, that's how we do talk. That's how people talk.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I think though in some respects Crow's Nest has really changed over time. It's got, you know, a beautiful French bistro there now, and so it's been interesting, you know, I guess to think about the way things have changed over time as well.
With my massive Googling of Toowoomba, I found out that it's fast becoming like a whole like cafe culture is going on.
Yeah,
there.
Definitely. We've got amazing coffee these days. When I was growing up, that just did not exist. And then, you know, I went to live in Brisbane and came back after we had kids, and, you know, there were all these amazing cafes now and holes in the walls, and
nice.
It's been nice.
I love that. We are so spoiled for choice here in Melbourne.
I know.
I love hearing about like coffee culture and restaurant culture everywhere else. You know, I get to talk to lots of different people. So, yeah, no, that's fantastic. Who doesn't love good coffee, right?
Oh, that's right.
It is really interesting that you wrote the novel, as you said, with a baby and a toddler. Writing a novel is no mean feat anyway. It's hard bloody work.
Yeah.
But to do it with two babies and to write about something that was so dark, if you like, and there were children involved, how hard was that for you at times to be writing that content?
Yeah. Look, I did it. I mean, I think it was, for me, to be honest, it was the first time I'd kind of worked in child protection with children of my own, to be honest. And so suddenly I had a reference point to everything I was reading in some of the cases I was reviewing. So that was pretty tough. And honestly, it was just incredibly cathartic to write a book about that and give some of those feelings to Dana. So it actually really helped me, I think. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of just logistically, I wrote it over 5 years. So, I mean, I didn't kind of pump it out while I was walking around with the baby and a baby Bjorn or whatever. You know, I just kind of did it when I had the time. I didn't put pressure on myself to do it quickly. You know, initially I was kind of hoping I could write it a lot quicker, and I'd often, you know, I guess feel a bit of despair about the time it was taking, but I just kind of had to realize I just didn't feel like I wanted to sacrifice my kid's life, I guess, on the altar of my, you know, ambition to write this book. So I just got to a point where I kind of thought it's just going to take as long as it's going to take.
But I love that. I do think that's quite amazing, because I like those stories, because I think people imagine that an author comes along and they just like knock out this book. And,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And
it's a lovely fantasy.
Yes, but it's not. It's not the reality. And I've spoken to so many incredible authors. I've been very lucky to speak to a lot of authors, and everyone is so different. But the reality is, it does take a long time. And there are authors who that is their full-time job.
Yes.
And they are very strict about how much they write every day. We had Sally Hepworth on this podcast, who's very much like that, but that is now her full-time job.
Yes.
And she, you know, she sort of says, I'm so privileged that I can do that.
Yeah.
But for a lot of writers, it's a long, long process. And for a lot of writers, it does take years.
Yeah. And I think when it is fractured a bit, you know, you come back to it, and then it takes you a little while to get back into it. So, yeah, I think what I've found going along is it often, if you can, it's helped me a little bit to go away for, you know, 3 days or something and just get a lot done. That's where I'm at the moment, kind of that binge writing cycle.
I like that.
Yes.
And when, like, I suppose because it did take so long, as you said, did it end up really differently from how you first imagined it?
Not really. I was a little bit worried at one point that the initial writing kind of wasn't as good as, you know, the end of the novel, but then I did have to go back and rework the beginning a bit, essentially. So no, it, you know, it came together fine, but, you know, I had amazing editors to work on it. So yes, you know, I don't think it affected it too much working on it for that length of time.
No, that's great. I want to know, how did it feel, like this whole process of getting a book deal? Because, you know, you have been writing for quite a while. This is not like, you know, although this is like your debut novel, if you like, you have been writing for quite a while. You've been in an anthology. Tell us a little bit about that, about the background of all of that.
Yeah, so I kind of started writing, I guess, in my late 20s, and I signed up for a short story course just to kind of dip my toes in the water, I guess. And I wrote a short story, and it got really good feedback from the writing group, and I kind of went, you know, I love this. It was like a big epiphany. It was like I've figured out what creatively I've been wanting to do for so long. And from there, I attempted to write like a full-length novel, and that got some really good feedback. I guess it got just enough good feedback for me to kind of think I should keep going. You know, got some agent interest, but essentially, you know, because I was learning, it didn't really have enough plot to kind of sustain the narrative. So, you know, it was a hard lesson, but I thought, right, I'm going to learn from that and go into the next novel and, you know, really try and plot it out. So that's what I did with Crow's Nest. So then, I guess in terms of getting it published, I signed up to do one of the Australian Society of Authors literary speed dating events, and I met my agent through that. So that was kind of my big breakthrough, really.
I love it. And was the manuscript finished at that point, or you're still working on the manuscript?
No, it was. I just thought I'm going to get it as good as I can possibly get it. And I guess that was a bit of a learning that I'd had from my kind of years of writing, that I had kind of got it in contact with an agent once before, and the work, it just wasn't finished. So, I mean, that just doesn't really work, because by the time I got her the finished work, she'd kind of moved on. So, yes, another life lesson. I was like, right, the next time an agent shows interest, it's going to be ready to go. So, yeah, I had it completely finished.
Which is pretty exciting. But what's really unusual about this with this publisher, though. They have actually put on this book, guaranteed great read or your money back.
Yep.
Right? And I was like, what? Like, I've never. Okay. I was like, okay, then that's bold. It is a bloody great read, just so everybody knows. Are you feeling the pressure of that? Like, how did that actually come about? Did they actually discuss that with you?
Yeah, they did. No, I just think it's been wonderful that UQP have just been so publicly willing to back it, really, and, you know, say they think it's a great read. So, yeah, I was incredibly happy about that. So that was, I guess, their marketing strategy for getting people excited about the book. And, you know, when the box of books came that they give you, the publisher, my kids saw it and they were really excited and they said, "Oh, hey, Mum." They said, "Why don't we send all these books back and we can make," they were trying to figure out how much money they could make. My 7-year-old, she was doing the maths. She was like, "Right, so how much are they?" And I kind of had to break her heart and say, "Sorry, sweetie, you need the receipt to do that." They were a bit sad.
But also, too, how brilliant is that? Like, there's nothing, there's no surefire way to bring you back to earth, believe me, than your own children.
Yeah. Yes, that's so true. Yeah.
Look, Mum's written this amazing book. Can we send it back and get money?
Yeah, they're just so focused on the cash at the moment.
That's hilarious.
That's the phase they're going through.
Tell me how that felt, though, when that box arrived. Did you video yourself? Did you do an unboxing?
No, I should have, you know. It was really emotional, honestly. It was surreal. It's, you know, it's just so surreal when you've wandered around for 5 years with this huge dream, having no idea whether it's actually going to come true, to see the book. And, you know, it was so beautiful. I love the cover. They just did an incredible job with the cover.
That is stunning, by the way.
I kind of jokingly said to my daughter, you know, "I'm just so in love with this book. I want to get married to it. It's just beautiful."
I'll show the back of it as well. It is really beautiful, but the imagery, they've so captured, like, the imagery that you describe so beautifully in this book as well. Yeah. So you must have been so relieved and thrilled because, you know, you don't always have any say in what the cover's going to look like.
Yeah, no, it's gorgeous. And the Hills Hoist, I just think it's an amazing concept because I feel like it really kind of embodies what the book is about. You know, it's about families and domesticity, and it's just the perfect image, I think, for the book.
Yeah. And it's very Australian, right?
Yes.
That's the other interesting thing.
Yeah.
But I did like the imagery as well of the crows throughout the book because I know it's called Crow's Nest, but, you know, that's the name of the town as well. And so, but you intertwined, like, the crows almost as a character in and of themselves through the novel. That's very clever too, I think.
Yes. I think I said, as, you know, when I kind of pictured writing the book Crow's Nest, I had that kind of image of the crows, you know, being on the cover. And in the epilogue, you know, it kind of features the core of the crows welcoming the dawn. So I just loved that kind of metaphor of the crows and, you know, the murder of crows. And,
the murder of crows. Yeah, I love that.
So it just seemed very appropriate.
Yeah, beautiful. And too, that there's a little bit of foreboding, I guess, when the crows show up, you know, and there are different, I don't want to, there's lots of different areas where these crows sort of just turn up, or someone says, or the crows are there before us, or, right? So for me, it felt like the crows, as I said, were almost like a character in and of themselves. Like they were a central sort of part of this novel that wove everything together as well.
Yeah, just gave things, I guess, a bit of a sense of foreboding.
Yeah.
Something bad was about to happen.
Yeah, and we do think about them as that. You know, you see black crows everywhere and you kind of go, oh, you know.
Yeah.
They've got a bad rap, haven't they?
They really do, but some of them are incredibly vicious. So I can, you know, I was swooped by a crow recently and I can see why they've had that bad rap. Yeah, there's one notorious one near the Toowoomba Courthouse. And
really?
Oh my gosh. I was traumatized after that experience.
I don't blame you.
I know. And we've got a big sign up now saying, watch out for that crow that's attacking everyone.
Wow. I'm mad for, like, magpies. I love them.
Really?
I love them. And I have a family that comes to the front of my house, and I feed them now mealworms, and they're just lovely. But she'll come right up to the front door now.
Yeah.
And she brings, she's brought the baby. They've got a baby now, and I didn't realise that their babies are babies for 2 years. But anyway, the baby will come. She's taught it to go to the front door and scream a lot. You can't ignore it, so you have to go out there and go, okay, here's food.
Yeah.
They are
hilarious.
really beautiful, though. Yeah. But they've got also a really bad reputation, and I know they do tend to swoop a lot of people. People think I'm crazy. People in my street are like, why are you feeding them? But the really interesting thing that I found out, which is interesting for your novel as well, is that, that crows, ravens, magpies actually do have extraordinary memories and facial recognition.
I have read about that.
This is true. Yeah.
Apparently they can recall kind of the faces of little boys throwing rocks at their nests and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So they remember you. And so if you show them an act of kindness, apparently I've never been swooped by one, so maybe that's why.
Yeah. Yes.
But they are very territorial. And,
yes. I think I've definitely had bad experiences with magpies as well. I know. And my husband was saying, you have to look at them. I was like, God, I don't want to look at them.
You do.
It's terrifying.
I know, but apparently if you make eye contact and you talk to them, like people think I'm crazy because I go out and talk to them, and random magpies elsewhere, I'll say, oh, hi. They think, oh, my God, she's nuts. She's like a crazy
the
bird lady.
Whisperer.
Yeah, well, no, but I do think that if you talk to them, they will look at you. When they look at you, they remember. So that's
incredible. Yeah. It's extraordinary.
So I guess the moral of that story is try not to be nasty to crows.
Yes.
Because they have long memories as well.
Yes, and you've clearly built up some really good goodwill.
I hope so.
Good magpie karma.
Magpie karma. I like that. It's quite interesting. I wanted to talk to you about an unsolved crime that kind of I wouldn't say inspired it, but how did an unsolved crime kind of play a role in you writing this book? Do you want to tell us what the crime was? And
to be honest, there were a few different ones that I drew inspiration from, and I guess it just kind of made it easier for me to picture. There was one in particular that I don't really like using the word inspired by because it just seems like the wrong word, I guess, but that I was quite sad about and scandalized, the one from 1991. And I guess I had vague memories of seeing a picture of the car in the Courier Mail when I was a child. And I don't think I read the article, but when I was researching the case, I saw that picture again and realised that I guess I felt a bit haunted about it when I was a child. That case also, it just, it was so sad, and I was just incredibly scandalised that after 3 inquests, it's still unsolved and there's never been any justice for those women. So I guess I felt Dana's sadness about that. And it was really, I guess, nice and comforting to kind of change that outcome and perhaps have a better outcome in the book for the women.
Yeah. And I think it's so relevant to talk about this as well. And I know Sally Layden brought this up for The Lady Vanishes, but and she's now become an advocate for people with, missing family members, where cases get dropped. They just go cold. There's no manpower. No one's talking about it. Yeah. But you're right. There's so many crimes in Australia and globally that are never solved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can't imagine what that's like for the family, never to get any closure.
No.
It must be, kind of living hell, really. It's awful.
I imagine that, Sally talked about walking down the street, and for a while, like every face that you see, you look at everyone because you're so haunted, and you just you want to believe that person is still out there. You want to believe that they're alive, or that they're safe, or something.
Yeah. Yes.
And in Sally's case as well, much like what your character Dana talks about, there was massive mishandling of her mother's case. That's been found in the initial inquiry. Yeah. Evidence that was lost, not cared for, leads that were never followed up. statements that were never taken. It's all of those things.
Yes.
Right? It's quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And I get that you can't say inspired by, but I guess all of us, if you read true crime and you see things that are really happening out there, it's very difficult to not be, to not feel compassion for those families.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And I guess feel a little bit of their anger and frustration about, finally it had been handled, well straight away, because I think that's the thing with these cases. Evidence kind of degrades over time, and it's very difficult to ask witnesses to remember what they were doing 30 years ago. So, that's the tragedy of it all.
Yeah, agreed. And really interesting. I'm trying to remember what podcast this was where I heard this on. Maybe it was. Have you heard of Shandy's story?
Yes, I have. Yes, yeah.
Quite extraordinary. Again, but through that, finding out that there were, all sorts of issues going on.
Yeah.
With blood tests and DNA tests and whatnot in Queensland.
Yeah.
That could have happened again. Yes, it could have been anywhere. Unfortunately, it was Queensland. But now it's it's to throw doubt, I guess, on cases going back however long to say, did we get it wrong?
Yes. It's scary, I guess. Like people, a lot of the systems that we work with they're also imperfect and they're flawed, and I guess we need to try and design them in a way that when there's human error, it doesn't just kind of, have huge ripple-on effects.
Yeah, true. And just, I guess, checks and balances.
Yes, that's right.
To kind of go, then we would pick up that human error earlier.
Yes, definitely.
We are human, so we do make mistakes.
Yeah,
I guess putting in processes, I suppose, to kind of go, well, how do we try and get it right as much as we can?
Yes.
Or how do we catch the errors,
Yeah, to design a system that is going to pick those up. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, and in no way am I, trying to bag the police force here or, people who work with DNA and all of those things. I do think that there's, a shortage of manpower often.
Yes.
There's a lot of crime out there, whether we like it or not, and there's a shortage of manpower.
Yeah. And that's a real issue, limited resources. It's going to be very difficult for everyone to do their best work if they're really under pressure and there's not enough people and not enough funding and those sorts of things. Yeah.
I really loved that your central character was female. Obviously mine's a feminist platform, but I really like strong characters.
Yeah.
And I guess, we don't see enough of them.
Yes.
As a central character.
Yeah.
I think Tara Moss does that particularly well in her crime novels, where in all of her novels, actually, they've been really strong female characters as leads.
Yes.
Which is really nice. So I was super thrilled to read your book and see that, and that she's so complex and well-formed, and women are complex. We're layered,
definitely.
Right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right. We're not all perfectly nice all the time. And I guess also I think when I was writing Dana, it occurred to me when I was starting out in social work, kind of in the early 2000s, there were just very few, I guess, really good role models for that. The kind of women I'd see in books or on TV were kind of bumbling and ineffectual. So I wanted her to be really, I guess, ruthless in her protection of children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that does come through. And I really like that. But some of the language that you use for other characters as well. There's a photograph, for example, of one woman who's got her arms around her sisters, and the language that you use is basically like a lioness. There is that sense through the book of some pretty tough women who are protective. And I, quite often that whole emotion, because women are emotional and we are nurturing, tends to be written in as a weakness rather than. Whereas for Dana, this is definitely a massive strength. Like you see her courage to go through situations that no one really wants to go through, and she does it from that place of wanting to care for others, protect others.
Yes. Yeah, it was important to me to, I guess, write her with that really kind of strong maternalistic instinct to protect the kids she's working with, and also Angus.
Yeah, she's pretty gutsy, that's for sure. I 100% love this book. I would highly recommend it. We will put up the links in all of our show notes for everyone where they can follow you and how they can get a copy of this book. They can run out and buy it now, people. It's fabulous. It is really great. I'm quite surprised, if I'm honest, that they're offering money back. Well, I guess it makes total sense because no one's going to want their money back. It's very good.
Yeah. I think it just, gives people that confidence that there's, quite a few people really backing it and they're feeling confident enough to say that you think this is going to be a good read.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. I love that you've written from the perspective of your life, places that you know, because it does, you help the reader feel like it's all very familiar. You take us into your world and into Dana's world, and I think that that's quite remarkable. So thank you for writing this incredible book.
Thanks, Sandy.
And what's next? Is there going to be a second?
Yes, I've literally just handed in the draft, I guess, for Kalani, which is the sequel. So in Crow's Nest, we went north of Toowoomba and Kalani is south of Toowoomba. And so that's about two seemingly unconnected events which occur in Kalani over a few days, a missing teenage boy and a hit and run. So Dana's back on the case for that one.
Oh, I'm super excited. So do we know approximately when that might come out?
I think we're looking at 2024.
How exciting.
Yes.
That is super exciting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, so it's nice. You'll get to see, if you liked these characters, most of them are back in that book.
Oh, that's so great. I'm really looking forward to it. And especially I imagine that we'll be seeing like Angus growing up and Dana doing what she does, which is fab.
Yeah. Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations again on this book.
Thanks, Sandy. And thanks so much for having me. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.